Awesome. Well, welcome to the second lecture for our blockchain fundamentals decal. My name is Ayush Agarwal. I'm the current co-president of blockchain at Berkeley. I'm a third year EECS major here at Cal. So feel free to ask me any questions throughout the lecture. We're going to talk about a lot of things today, a lot of very important philosophy and a lot of history that led up to the creation of Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about what blockchain is today and how it has evolved from that. I'm here today with Kentaro too. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. I'm a sophomore in LNSCS, and I'm in a dev in the consulting team, and I'm also helping with the education today. Yeah, just really excited to meet you all and teach you some cool stuff.
Cool. So I know the policy for our decals is that we can have video off and it come asynchronously, but there's 40 of you here today. So if you're here, you might as well turn your video on and interact with your fellow classmates. It's a lot more fun that way. And I personally like it a lot more when I lecture and people have their video on. So I want to say hi to all of you. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll have the chat open, so feel free to drop a question at any time. Table of contents. Today we're going to talk about a couple things. I will take on the first couple sections, so talk about Bitcoin and the philosophy behind that, and then talk about after the birth of this technology, what is the early history behind it. And then Kentaro will take over from the more modern approach to what blockchain is nowadays. So starting off with the pre-Bitcoin times, libertarian dreams. Before we get into that, there's one fundamental tenet of this technology, and that is privacy. So one definition of privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. And that is true. That is what privacy is. But we have to dig a little bit deeper into the implications of what privacy is in a functioning society. And when we see that, we dig deeper, we start to realize that a lot of the implications of privacy that we think we have begin to fall apart. There is a history in the United States, at least, of privacy being a tool for oppression. So starting all the way back from 1917, during World War I, when the DOJ created a special surveillance program for Black people in the US, all the way ranging from Operation COINTELPRO by the FBI to internment camps for Japanese citizens. And you can pretty much pick a group of people, and there's probably been a surveillance initiative by the United States government against that group of people, because we've used surveillance as a way to keep track of what people are doing. And that is an infringement on privacy. So when people ask, why is privacy important? Why is our data privacy important? We can think back to historical reasoning as to why privacy is a protective measure against things like a large government that tries to step in on our rights. To think about this more conceptually, let's borrow a history from a philosophy textbook. This is a very common thought experiment in philosophy, which is Michael Foucault's Panopticon. So imagine that you are a prisoner. You are in a prison cell in this U shape. There is a guard, a warden in this prison that sits at the very center in that tower. You cannot see the warden, but you know that the warden is there. You are just a single prisoner in a single cell in this bent complex. The key about this structure is that the warden can see you at any time the warden wants, but you don't know if you are being directly observed or not. So the mere implication that you could be being watched is what creates the lack of privacy, and it creates a constant threat of supervision. So the prisoner is seen without ever being the prisoner is seen without ever seeing, and the guards see everything without ever being seen. So Foucault argues that as a result of constantly being watched, prisoners change their own behavior, and their paranoia becomes as effective a tool of control as actual surveillance. They become silent, docile, and alienated. And the panopticon is a very good extension of why privacy matters in today's society. If we allow our data, for example, our online profiles and our online data to be continuously exploited by very large companies, and we can't see what's going on, what they're doing with the data, we have no idea, it's not transparent at all, then eventually we may get to a point where they know so much about us and we don't even know how our actions are being influenced by them because they have so much data about us. And I would argue that time has already come, but that's not the point of this lecture. There's a group of people who were against this. And these people are the cyberpunks and the crypto anarchists. They knew that the digital age is coming. And they knew that these concerns over privacy, over data collection are coming. So they were a libertarian group concerned with privacy, and they advocated as cryptography as an important tool to protect privacy. So going back to our definition of what privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. And privacy in an open society requires anonymous transaction systems. So this definition of privacy is what blockchain people focus on. It is not the idea that no one knows what you are doing and you do not interact with the outside world at all. It is the idea that you have the power in your hands to selectively reveal yourself to who you want to. This fundamental notion is very different than what we have today, where to use a service like Facebook or Google, you pretty much have to opt in and reveal yourself to quite a large number of people. You don't really know who's seeing your data or seeing your activity. So the idea behind privacy is that people may still see your data and see your activity, but you will know exactly who that is in a literal sense, not in a sign this document sense and let us control your data. So privacy is necessary for an open society. In the electronic age, privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal yourself to the world. And that is the quote from the Cyberpunk manifesto, which is one of the most powerful documents in this industry. Every single innovation that has happened that has blown away people in this industry and has been adopted by institutions, by banks, and all these different people have come from this philosophy that was outlined in the Cyberpunk manifesto. So I'm telling you today that the change is coming, that the world is shifting towards these ideals as people start to wake up and start to realize that there are things at stake beyond what they realize. So people tried to create a transaction system that was private, and there were a couple early attempts. And I want to talk you through some of these early attempts, and I will show you how these early attempts have created what we know today as Bitcoin. So, and yes, you can turn your camera off. You can choose to selectively reveal yourself to me, your lecturer. That is your choice, and I respect that choice. And I appreciate those who have turned their camera on. So the first attempt is Hashcash. Hashcash is the basis of where we got hashing in our modern transaction systems. So coins are minted by expending resources instead of by a central bank. And this is where kind of proof of work came into play. So you solve a cryptographic puzzle, and that is designed to inherit or to fight against email spam. If you think about this conceptually, you could spam an email by sending 1,000 emails at once really fast, and there's no like limit on how fast you can send emails. But with this system, you have to solve a cryptographic puzzle. You have to do brute force computation to send a single email. So it's very expensive to send 1,000 emails in 1 second. It's not even possible. So that idea became used for transaction systems as a security feature, so you can't attack the network using DOS type attacks, denial of service type attacks. A second attempt is B-Money, and this introduced two protocols. One was a practical way to enforce contractual agreements between anonymous actors, which is our current existence of an RSA cryptography scheme, or a public key crypto system. And the second is a protocol in which every participant maintains an individual database of how much money belongs to each user. So that is a big fundamental tenet behind blockchain. So yeah, quickly going back to the denial of service attack. In a modern system, a denial of service attack is when a group of people or a single like hacker or attacker spams a network with so much traffic and information that no actual user can access the network because it is trying so hard to keep up with the flood of requests that came in from the attacker. So the proof of work protocol, the solve the cryptographic puzzle before you can do the transaction ideology, that helps solve these types of attacks. And I'm speaking very generally here. This is not precise security. This is not a precise security feature that I'm mentioning, but this is the intuition that we will start building later in the course as well. So B-Money introduced this idea that everyone should own the shared copy of the ledger. And that ultimately led itself into the Bitcoin network. So who was Satoshi Nakamoto? Satoshi Nakamoto is the famous person who invented Bitcoin. It's an anonymous person, that's not his real name, and he released the Bitcoin white paper in 2008, which was an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust. So Bitcoin is the first cryptocurrency. Its first block was mined on January 3rd, 2009. And the Coinbase of the Genesis block refers to a story in the Times of London involving the chancellor bailing out banks. So the headline is Chancellor bails out, or Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. And it's a very famous newspaper. You can look up that quote and it'll show up on Google, because that is ingrained in the first block of Bitcoin. And it makes sense. This technology was created because these large institutions have been failing us. So this newspaper that was embedded into the first block really sums up why Bitcoin was created, why it was given birth to. So why does blockchain exist? You can see from this historical buildup to Bitcoin that blockchain is a technological solution to a social problem. It is meant to decentralize and democratize ownership of assets that we own ourselves. Instead of someone telling us that we own it, it actually belongs to us through a provable network that is driven by the community. That intuition is very hard to build for the masses. And as more and more people educate themselves about this, more and more people will realize that this is the way that things should work in our modern society. So the potential for blockchain systems is absolutely immense. Any system that currently relies on a third party, whether it be a housing deed, whether it be a loan, whether it be your diploma, whether it be anything that someone tells you that you have, that will eventually be disintermediated using a public blockchain. You don't have to have trust in the institution that tells you you own something. You will just own it directly, because it will exist on a shared ledger that everyone has and trusts. So how did Bitcoin gain value? The idea of having trust in the system, having proof of work instead of trust, this is all great, but it only matters if people have faith in it. We have faith in the power behind the dollar, so we trust that its value it'll be valuable. Arguably that is going away these days, but how did Bitcoin gain faith? It started off with a pizza party. On May 22nd, 2010, Laszlo Hainkes purchased $25 of pizza for 10,000 Bitcoins. And if you know now, 10,000 Bitcoins multiplied by $40,000 is quite a bit of money. So that is the world's first ever Bitcoin transaction for a tangible asset. And Bitcoin at this moment went from something worthless to something with real value that is agreed upon of having value. So if you look at this forum post from Laszlo here, you can see where they were discussing, like, maybe I'll buy pizza with Bitcoin. So this is really just a technology born on the internet. It's really cool. So any questions here so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
I think you mentioned at one point that, like, kind of ideally everything should be kind of using Bitcoin, so it's more privatized. I don't know how to say that. But if that was the case, I was wondering, like, how would things like social welfare work?
Okay, good question. So I think to backtrack, everything should be public and should be run by the community rather than a institution. Bitcoin is one example of a technology that can achieve that goal. So things like social welfare, for example, there are actually multiple different people working on this problem using a blockchain. So there are different approaches to it, and I can't exactly speak to which one would be the best approach, but the general idea would be that instead of having a single government system where we rely on like the government basically to hand out welfare to people, and then there's like debate internally over who should get welfare and things like that. The idea behind a blockchain-based welfare system is that there are a community of people who decide that there should be some sort of maybe basic income or basic level of welfare that people have. There is a distribution of governance in this welfare system. So some people people in the community will be able to essentially vote with their money or with their resources to decide how the welfare should be distributed. And from there, basically, there will be some sort of network of social welfare that could cover many things, from some type of social security to some kind of UBI to a variety of these kind of economic functions. And they'll be tied to this platform that was made for these types of economic functions. So and you can do this with normal money, but the idea is that we're at the stage right now where we're trying to mirror things we can do with normal money that we can do in a decentralized way. So us as individuals don't really have that much power to decide how things are distributed. In reality, it really is up to the politicians that we elect. And a lot of the times they have different incentives to help their establishment and things like that. So a couple projects that are notable to look into here are Circle's UBI, which is a popular one that has kind of started up to solve this problem. I think that's a good place to start. And then I know there's more, so I can follow up in a Piazza post and add to the slides as well for those who are watching a recording.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And Frank, you're asking, if the value of Bitcoin fluctuates so much, how can it be distributed fairly? Very good question. So Bitcoin isn't the answer to everything, right? Bitcoin is just the first and will continue to be one of the most important cryptocurrencies that exist. But there are concepts of stable coins, basically, that have a stable value tied to like the US dollar. So it's not really a question of the price of Bitcoin. The question is the mechanics behind the currency that allow it to be distributed fairly or distributed openly and transparently. So Bitcoin probably wouldn't be the coin that you're receiving for like welfare. It would probably be some sort of stable coin, like Maker DAI, DAI.
Can I ask a question too?
Sure. Yeah.
You said something about like comparing it. You compared it to like how in the future is going to be used like diplomas and stuff. I don't really remember exactly what you said. Can you just like repeat that?
Yeah. Thank you. So, I think the point there was that anything that currently relies on a central institution to tell you own something. So a better example is like your housing deed. Right now, how do you know you own your apartment or your house? If you purchased a house that you're not renting, you own it. How do you know that you own it? You basically go to the city government and you ask them, do I own this house? And they'll ask a private company that basically says, yes, you own this house. And then they get back to you. So there's a middleman here that doesn't really need to exist. And the argument is that in 10, 20 years time, that middleman won't exist anymore because there'll be an economically supported network that tells you own the house and that everyone agrees upon. So
that wouldn't necessarily be Bitcoin, but it's like a similarity kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. Bitcoin is just a very important part of blockchain because it was the first real use case for blockchain, and it honestly exemplifies why this technology exists. But it's not going to be like you wouldn't really build something like that on Bitcoin. It would probably be either its own blockchain or built on an existing chain like Ethereum.
For sure. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, but that's a good point, right? Like Bitcoin isn't meant to be the end all be all solution to all these problems. I just view it as a perfect example to why the technology exists. And I think that's the big takeaway from this lecture is that Bitcoin was created out of all of these issues that arose from financial troubles from large institutions. So after it was created, after the pizza party, what is the history? What happened here? So a lot of people tried to build centralized institutions around Bitcoin to expand its adoption. So in 2010, Jed McCaleb created Mt. Gox, which was the biggest online Bitcoin exchange. There was a slight hack that happened and some fraudulent trading that happened. But then by 2014, they bounced back and they were at a point where 70% of all transactions of Bitcoin across the entire internet were being handled on Mt. Gox. And what they didn't realize is that this whole time, there was a breach in their smart contract security, or not smart contract security, but basically the layer where they interacted with the Bitcoin network itself. That was a big breach. So they lost 744,000 Bitcoins in a theft, and they declared bankruptcy. Moral of the story here is that if you're building on top of a fundamentally decentralized technology, you're going to have to try very hard to secure something that is centralized. And oftentimes, building something centralized on top of something decentralized doesn't make sense. There is some cognitive dissonance here. So additionally, as you all probably know, Bitcoin had a drug scandal. And there were Bitcoins used in the dark web. Big boohoo. I'm so sad. And the FBI now basically understands that this happens. And if you buy like $3.5 million of any drug on the dark web, you probably will get a knock on your door by the FBI. But I mean, that is one of the biggest benefits of Bitcoin is that it's public, that if you can analyze the network and see what's going on, it's just addresses. So you don't really know exactly who's buying things, but you can see the activity. You can the community has the power to look into the chain, into the ledger, and see what's going on. And if there's problems, it can be talked about in public, mostly on Twitter, matter of fact. So Ross Ulbricht, who basically founded the Silk Road, is now serving a life sentence. And he is considered in the core Bitcoin community as a hero. And he is really someone who people want to free Ross. So there's that. The Bitcoin had a bubble. We rose up. This was before 2014, late 2013. It started to gain value. This is when it started making headlines. So this is actually when I bought my first Bitcoin. I bought it at $400 here, $600. And then it kind of had a little run. And then obviously this made headlines. So Mt. Gox lost some money here. People wanted to get in on the hype and buy Bitcoin. People found a person named Satoshi Nakamoto who was actually just a normal man living in California who happened to share the same name. And everyone thought that was the real Satoshi. But so now he's kind of a meme. He's kind of a celebrity. Tim Draper in 2014 predicted that the Bitcoin price is still headed upwards to 10K. Now the predictions are around 100K. And there is some merchant acceptance. So porn.com is a big player that accepted Bitcoin first. Overstock.com was a major retailer that accepted Bitcoin. There's vending machines now. There's a lot of different places now where you can buy Bitcoin. Cool. So since then, there's been an explosion of different Bitcoin startups. So there's Coinbase, A16Z has gotten in the mix, BitGo, all these different capitals, like Pantera is a popular VC, Circle, UBI, as I mentioned. So this is a very small list, and these are honestly not even the best people to put in the list. But there has been an explosion of companies formed around crypto and really around Bitcoin. So it's important to understand that this ecosystem is so vibrant. It is not just a bunch of people on the internet trying to get together and buy Bitcoin to drive the price up. There are really very legitimate and quite a large number of people employed in this industry. So I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And if it does, it's not going to go away in a snap. It will take a lot of time for this to mature. And it very much is. So after that, there was a burst and the price kind of hovered around 200. And then there was another boom in 2017, and then there was a crash. And then now recently there's been another boom. This one is more because of institutional adoption. Elon Musk just bought $1.5 billion in Bitcoin. Fidelity, BlackRock, and all these firms have been buying Bitcoin as well. So what people say is that the institutions are basically trying to buy Bitcoin as a hedge against the dollar. So, and there's a lot of other financial reasons for buying Bitcoin as an asset. So yeah, there's maybe some questions here. One thing I'll add to the slide is that though the companies that have sprung up now are not only just Bitcoin companies, but they're actually a very, very big variety. And I think Kentaro will talk about that in a couple, I think maybe next actually. So yeah, any questions for my part? Okay, so yeah, I think last thing I'll say for me is that it's very hard in a lecture format to kind of get across the main point. And really the main point of this entire section is that blockchain and Bitcoin was made for a very specific reason, because there was a very specific problem that the inventors identified in society. And this is the technological solution to that problem. So for people who talk about the price of Bitcoin fluctuating and issues that the technology has and how it's not the perfect solution, is because you can't think of it in the same mindset. This is not like a startup that came and promised you the world and promised you that they're going to solve all your problems. It's not like Robinhood telling you they're going to give you the power to trade, but then in reality, they're buddy with Citadel. This is a completely different mindset that we have to enter if you want to enter this industry. Bitcoin's price, I don't think really matters that much, because the foundational tenet behind this technology is driving all of the progress in this industry. So stop asking about the Bitcoin price. Stop considering its flaws and arguing with it academically. You just have to get behind what this technology was made to do and try to change the world by riding this wave.
All right, so should we start with the next part?
Or is there a question?
I was just gonna, quick question, like I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole Bitcoin is the future thing. And I feel like a huge barrier is shelterless people. I'm not like I feel like because of that, we have to have physical currency. Or I don't know. I'm wondering if like there's been conversations about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think physical currency will continue to exist. The governments will continue to exist. I mean, at the end of the day, the U.S. has like thousands and thousands of nukes. It's a very powerful entity, and it will continue to issue its own currency. And printing money is one of the biggest ways that they buy more nukes. So I don't think that's going to stop. And again, the point I'm making is not that Bitcoin is the future. The point is that this technology has been invented because of Bitcoin, and it has the power to change a lot of things. So yeah, so I think there are also intersections with like physical cash on blockchain. So we're very early, and the point right now is not to argue about the specifics, but the point is to try to jump in and see how you can use this to solve the problems of the world. Because clearly the things that we have right now haven't been solving these problems. If anything, they've been creating them. So okay, I'm gonna pass it on. That was a big rant, but now Kentaro will talk about some of the modern approaches. And yeah, you want to share screen, Kentaro? We can switch off.
Yeah.
Real quick. Cool.
Okay. All right. Wait, sorry. Share. Sorry, no technical difficulties. Okay. Okay, so now we talked about Bitcoin. So now we're going to start talking about Ethereum. And what's Ethereum? So basically, Bitcoin is coin-centric, right? The primary purpose is to have an alternative to like existing currency. And whereas Ethereum is a Turing-complete protocol, so it has its own language that you can use to program and make anything, which is why its Turing-complete is really important, since that allows it to make while loops and so forth. And it uses a coin, Ether, as its fuel. And then the primary purpose of Ethereum is a platform for decentralized applications and smart contracts. And some cool history points is from 2013 to 2016. Basically, in late 2013, Ethereum, described in the white paper by Vitalik Buterin, he's the person who started the Ethereum, and he's also come to talk to some of the BAB events as well. And in July and August 2014, Ethereum starts its crowd sale. And then 2015, they officially launched. And in 2016, their value of tokens of more than 1 billion. It's still going up right now. And in 2016, there was a DAO Rising hack, which I think we covered previously. And in here, at the hack on 2016, there was the regulatory circumstances at the time was that there's a lot of speculation about like how the Securities and Exchange Commissions, the SEC, would rule on the DAO fiasco and whether they would reverse the token's values. So basically, what happened was there's like a big hack, and a lot of people disagreed on whether they wanted to keep it or whether they wanted to revert it to the previous version, because a lot of people lost money. And so the SEC, might have come in, and then a lot of people didn't know what was going to happen. And so the economic circumstances at the time was that the exchange traded funds are ruling, and there's a lot of ICOs, people saying, oh, I'll give you a bunch of tokens if you give us money, and then we'll make our own startup. But a lot of those used to be scams. So they used to be really popular, but it was kind of sketchy. So now not many of those exist anymore. And then there's a lot of venture capital funding for crypto companies, and there's still a lot of venture capital and funding in the crypto companies as well. And some other factors were people just didn't want to miss out on the next Bitcoin, and it just kept rising. And this is some of the hype from that time. And yeah, there's a lot of things like Bitcoin, Coinbase, all kinds of memes, and you can go and look at a lot of these things. It's pretty funny. And here are some prominent projects from Ethereum. CryptoKitties, basically you have like a cat, and then you can breed them. Some of them are rare, and then you can sell them for more Ethereum or not. And then DAI is like a whole organization that's like a whole kind of like social project to have like a decentralized autonomous organization where people are able to govern themselves. And another one's the Brave browser, which is basically built on, I think, Chromium, and gives you tokens for like looking at websites or clicking on ads. So basically, it gives you the power to have value for your own time on using the internet, instead of like Google Chrome just like taking on your information and you don't get anything at all. And do you have any questions? Okay, yeah, I think Ayush has a lot of the questions answered, so we'll keep going. So now we're going to go over enterprise blockchain, where it's basically, big companies try to get into blockchain, and, a lot of these people who want to go into blockchain as well as the banks, because they're like, oh, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, they might change the things that are, currently centralized finance, like might take over the dollar. So they want to make sure they're in on the next big thing, right? So basically, there's a rise in interest in private blockchains or permission ledgers, where like only a few people who are selected have access to the actual, Bitcoin, like blockchain itself, or there's going to be certain people with special privileges compared to different people. And the issue is basically, all the good things about blockchain are basically gone. It's just not open, not trustless, no economic incentives. Like, yeah, basically it's just a public key, like cryptography, and they're just like separate databases. Like we already have like separate like father-child database structures that we could just use. So we're just kind of using like the wrong technology here. But the good thing is that it's more compliant. But again, it's like you could just use like a bunch of different databases and different methods. And some private blockchain initiatives are ones by Hyperledger, IBM, Chain, And yeah, oh, shit. Yeah, and essentially, Hyperledger is trying to make consortium ledgers where groups of people have certain permissions. But there's recently been a lot of beef from like the whole crypto community against these kind of projects because, as mentioned before, there's these things that basically we could just use another technology for. So these are kind of dying down, but they still exist today, and we'll see where it goes from here. And another interesting thing is, a lot of prominent figures have a lot of hot takes, right? So one interesting person to track was Diamond. And so in 2014, she was like, "Oh, it's like so bad. It's just going to be copy pasted." And then again, he was like, "They're trying to take our lunch. We're going to kill them." In 2015, they were like, people think it's a fight, but they're not going to win at all. Like cryptocurrency will never ever go anywhere, right? And you can kind of see this graph here of how he starts kind of talking a little bit differently about Bitcoin. And in 2017, he calls it a fraud, and he's like, "Oh, they'll never want to buy it." But he likes the technology, so you start to see like, oh, maybe he's like into the blockchain stuff. Maybe he was just a little scared of the whole finance industry getting taken over or something. And then in 2019, JP Morgan said they're the first bank to successfully test like the first digital coin, and they make their own coin, and it's for their own ledgers and their own banks. And yeah, that's pretty ironic, right? Like he like hated it and stuff, but then now he's like the first person to have this thing created for his own company. And yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Cryptocurrency and blockchain. A lot of people have interesting opinions. So definitely, try to look into what you really think is true. There's a lot of false information. There's a lot of like hype going on. So a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. So just like you have to be open to whatever's out there and critical of like whether it's true or like everyone has their own opinion. So remember to have your own opinion too. Don't get sucked into the hype or like trust someone just because they have some authority, right? So any questions? Yeah, okay, so Ayush is answering questions. So we'll keep going. So blockchain community and politics. So there's a lot of community within the blockchain space. There's the Webcoin talk. Crypto Twitter is like really good. It's like sicko mode. There's people going crazy. There's some people that have actually really good information. Like sometimes there's like thread drops of like how the certain error occurred. You should definitely check it out. If you already have a Twitter, you should just like start following people or just like ask someone like, oh, who should I follow? And it's really interesting because a lot of people have like hot takes and they go crazy on Twitter, right? And of course, in Slack, there's a lot of like private groups for companies that you can just join. And r/Bitcoin, Reddit is always good. There's also blockchain at Berkeley right here, where we try to help spread the information about blockchain that we know. And yeah, so there's a lot of different blockchains. There's different platforms, different softwares, whether it's public or private. And a lot of people are very passionate about certain parts. So for example, one of our previous presidents is like super into Bitcoin, so she really believes in Bitcoin, whereas some people might not believe into Bitcoin. So it's always really interesting seeing the threads, like people kind of like arguing at like a super intricate level and being like, wow, like I didn't even know that was like a point of argument to be had. And it's very interesting, like the minute details and like all the small things that you can learn just by like looking at threads of just people talking about whatever they're interested in. So yeah, definitely check it out. And yeah, so BAB itself is now delegated a bunch of tokens from Compound and Uniswap. And so now there's like a little team where we go and propose things to make the entire protocol better. And we make our own proposal, and then we might also write our own code. And we basically go on Twitter and we post whatever we want to do. And from there, people can retweet or comment whatever they think. And so here again, you see that Twitter is kind of a big thing in crypto. So it's definitely good to just try to make a Twitter account and just check out what it is, even though Twitter is like centralized, right? So any questions for this part? Oh, Bitcoin on Twitter. I mean, I'm not on the, I haven't followed Bitcoin, but just in like cryptocurrency in general, a lot of people have interesting takes. But yeah, a lot of people have, it's always fun to ask like, what do you think about Bitcoin? Because like a lot of people are, very all over the spectrum. It's like a hot topic. So it's always fun to ask people. All right, I'm gonna keep going. So where are we now? Basically the projects that we have right now, right? And exchanges, so, and like decentralized finance, right? Decentralized exchanges is basically where you go and you're like, okay, I want to change one Ethereum for like one Bitcoin, let's say, right? And then usually what happens is, if like trading stuff, you pose like a bid or a ask, and then the opposing people or the list of like however many people are willing to buy or sell at automatically like fills whatever you want, and from there you get your own trade, right? And that's usually how it works in the centralized exchanges, where there's like a centralized platform you go to, and they like manage all the data, like whose information is like matched first and so forth. And so what people do is with like Robinhood and Citadel, for example, whenever you make a trade on Robinhood, it's like physically made so that your trade will execute like after whatever like bot or anything that Citadel wants to do happens. So for example, like if you have some sophisticated algorithm on Robinhood running, some algorithm on Citadel might detect it, and then they'll just copy you, and they'll take more profits than you because they can just like have access over the entire like centralized exchange, right? So that's kind of the issue with centralized exchanges. But in DeFi, basically there's an automated market maker, which we'll go into much more later. But essentially, what you do is there's like a function, and based on that function, it's already predetermined how much you get, and there's like a pool of money that people already put money into, and so it automatically just goes in there. So that's what Uniswap and DY over DX does, and they just have like different functions. And for Uniswap, it's just like literally just a line, and for DY over DX, it's something more complicated. And the centralized exchange is a little bit similar, where there's going to be bids and asks, and there's going to be like a pool of people where they kind of control who gets to sell to who. But it's in blockchain, so people can't really mess with it. And if someone messes with the orders and stuff, you can verify it. And yeah, DeFi itself, it's just like a huge place. There's so much things going on. Yeah, payments, custodial, investing, exchanges. You could just stare at this for a while and like look at the logos. Like it's really cool. And yeah, DeFi itself is very interesting in having like such a diverse things, and like options are kind of new. I don't think it's on here, but one of the blockchain at Berkeley projects, Open, was working on that. So yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, here's the Open, the startup that's working at the accelerator. There's also yield farming, which is basically when you provide liquidity to like a trading pool, right? For Ethereum and Bitcoin. So you provide like 50 Ethereum, 50 Bitcoin, so that people can like trade, and there's like a pool to trade from, right? And what happens is like when you give the money, you get a token representing like, oh, you gave this much money to this pool. So for example, if you give like 50-50 to Bitcoin and Ethereum pool, then you get like 10 coins for the Ethereum Bitcoin pool. And then what you can do is you can use that coin that represents the pool to reinvest, and put that into like a Ethereum and Bitcoin pool to Ethereum pool. And it just keeps going on and on, where you just use coins over and over to get more yield, since you get like an interest rate at each deposit. And so essentially you just keep doing that over and over, and that's called yield farming. And we'll probably get into that more later in the lectures. And there's also things like lending protocols, such as like Compound and OB, where you can essentially borrow nearly an infinite amount of money for just like a function to execute, and then you can return it immediately after the function is done. Since in smart contracts, you can just create whatever you want. But there's all stoppers. So like if you happen to use up money and there's not enough money and you can't return the money, it just like cancels your function. But we'll go more into this much later. So you don't have to worry if it's like kind of complicated. And yeah, another interesting project is Substrate, which is basically if you do web dev, it's like express.js, where it helps bring basically like the infrastructure of like building a blockchain. Because every time a blockchain is made, like so far everyone makes their like original cryptography, original networking, like all this complicated stuff that everyone redoes just because like we don't have something to build it off of, right? So instead, a Substrate comes in and it's like, here, we have this like pre-made stuff. Here you can just go off of this and you can make the like nitty-gritty and the specifications that you want. You don't have to worry about like all the basic stuff that should be already made, right? And so this is really cool because it allows for more people to be able to just make blockchain much faster and easier, right? And another interesting project is Polkadot, which is basically it's a big chain that connects other chains. And so the relay chain here you can see is coordinates like all the blockchains together. Parachains are like small baby blockchains that are made, and bridges are just like connecting to like pre-existing blockchain systems. And so what this allows it to do is like all the blockchains will be able to actually communicate with each other. Because right now, like everyone's just making their own blockchain from scratch, and so it's like it's not really compatible, right? There's, for example, like if you think of it as like a cord, like if you have like a USB 3, but then you have your like Apple computer, then that's like the plug just doesn't go in, right? And then you have to like make some specific product to like convert those two, and it's just kind of a mess, right? So this new project to have things consolidated together, I feel like it's really going to be the way going forward, since it's going to be much easier like building and things can communicate with each other. And potentially this could allow for people to like share networking power if they want to, and like communicate in case people have like too much work on their network and on other ones down. So this could potentially help speed up like the transaction per second, which is like a big problem with blockchain of being too slow, right? And then so the final thing is we're right now supposedly a lot of the places are saying we're going towards Web 3.0, right? And what's Web 3.0? So basically, before we understand that, we understand like what's like Web 1.0, 2.0. I didn't really know this until I saw this, but it's really cool, right? So basically, the way you want to think about it is like Web 1.0 is the internet was a global library, right? You could go to the internet and you could just like look at stuff that's already in there, but it's just like an archive, right? You can't post anything. And then Web 2.0 is when you have global publishing, so people can interact with it, right? So this is when people start posting things. People also read. So this is where like social media and all this like interactive web is happening, right? But the issue is only like centralized databases own this information, right? Like companies that can afford to host these databases, like the FANG, Facebook, Google, and like Twitter and social media stuffs, all have your information, and they basically sell your soul, right? All your information is just sold to other people, and this is going to be potentially solved by Web 3.0, where instead of a single database, it's a global data bank, where each person can basically tokenize themselves and treat their own data as like a token, own content as a token, and will be able to have more access to like whatever they want to do. So they'll be able to like sell their data if they want to. They'll be able to like sell their YouTube videos to like different content providers. And essentially it's going to be a data bank where people go to exchange their like tokens, kind of like their money, which is like part of their data or whatever they have, right? In order to get whatever they want, whether it's a service or a cash or whatever, right? And here are some examples of like Web 2.0 apps, which are like the current apps going into Web 3.0. So here you can see Brave. I'm actually using Brave right now. There's a lot of storage things. We might go into those later. And yeah, there's just a lot of cool projects going on, so you should definitely check it out. And another cool project is energy innovation. So like microgrid, they basically set up solar panels so that you could have microtransactions, which are like small, like 1 cent or like half a cent transactions for your energy bill, right? Because if you have extra energy, you could sell it, but it might not be that much, right? And usually it's just like too much of a hassle to sell it. So there's like a whole system made with blockchain that makes this much easier. Another one is Switch, which basically does the same thing but for carbon footprints. And carbon credits is another thing with carbon. Viridium, basically another one with carbon. Recycle coin basically provides recyclers. And the whole thing that's kind of useful here is that blockchain is tamper proof, right? So if you did something and it's on the blockchain, like it's going to be there. Maybe you could change it, but it's going to be evident that you changed it. So this is a really good way of storing what happened and like storing the past like kind of permanently, right? So in this sense, it's really interesting to see blockchain just like a different way of storing data that's like hard to tamper and remove. So if you look at blockchain as like a sort of a data structure, which is basically a way you store data in like CS terms, right? I think that's the way to look at blockchain because there's a lot of ways that you could use blockchain itself, and cryptocurrency is just one small use case, right? So there's like a whole space of like all these things going on, whether it's web browser storages or like remote jobs. So definitely, there's a lot of applications, and don't limit yourself to like just cryptocurrency, even though that's where like the big money is at, right? So yeah, any questions?
Do you mind going back to the three different web, the where we are now? Yes. Can you go over again why these, like what these are really quickly? Sorry, I was confused about this slide.
Yeah, for sure. Basically, it just kind of like I mean, when you make stuff, it's like it's not really categorized, right? But after you make things and you look at how the things were developed, you can say like, oh, this is like the era when this happened. Kind of like how we look at history and we're like, oh, this is the Paleolithic era because it looks like these things happened together in this area, right? I mean, so basically, this is just a way of like looking at the history of the web and just saying like, oh, like there was an era called Web 1.0 where most of it was global libraries where people could only read information, and there was a transition period, but that's like kind of like the way we look at like history, right? We just kind of make a grid and we're like, okay, this is about this area because like most of these things are happening. And then after that, people started having interactive things with like JavaScript coming up, and you could post and like store information in centralized databases. And then Web 3.0 is like potentially where we're going to, where instead of like a centralized database, we would have like all our own data. So like each of us will be like a baby database, right? And then we can, have the like privacy, right? We have the control over what information in our database we show to the world, right? So we go to the bank and we're like, hey guys, I have this data. Can I have some money? Or like, oh, I have this data. I'll sell like where I go to my locations. Can I get access to Facebook or something like that, right? I mean, we still might not be able to get out of the paradigm of like, people want our data just because data is useful, but we'll at least have the control over the privacy and what to do with it. And we can actually choose instead of just like having everything taken away, which is basically what's happening right now. Right. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anything else? Let me check the chat. Yeah, answering Zoe's question. Yeah, that's a really good point, right? It's like what's the value of cryptocurrency, right? It's kind of like saying like what's the value of anything, right? I mean, like it's kind of gets philosophical in the way that yeah, it's a token's utility, right? But a lot of times there's a lot of like hype and also kind of like just like authority, whether it Diamond, the guy who's like JP Morgan, whether he says Bitcoin is good or not. So there's a lot of things that go into like value of something, right? That's like a whole study of philosophy. But like yeah, generally the best way if you want to like buy cryptocurrency, probably just like look into like how useful it is. Like, do you think it'll be actually great? Like a lot of these things, honestly, it's kind of like a personal opinion and like personally, would you like vouch all that money on that token, right? So a lot of this is just a personal choice. So if you truly believe that Bitcoin is just like the best thing and it's going to change the world, I mean, you can just throw your money into it. But it's really up to you, which is kind of why it's so interesting because it's not like other things where it's like machine learning where it's been happening for a while. It's like the 1940s and the math has been building up and it's like used very well. But blockchain and this whole space is new. It's like totally up to you. Like, what do you think? So everyone kind of has a big impact, and everyone's voice is pretty much very important because we're the people shaping it right now. So yeah, it's very much up to you what you value. Anything, yeah. Anything else? Yeah. It's like it's like anything. It just the value depends on the stock market or whatever.
Can I see the next slide? Oh wait.
Oh yeah.
They're like, yeah. So I had a question. It's like I just saw the messaging part. So in the future, Web 3.0, that's where we're not gonna use the center, right? We just share the information to like we can control the privacy, say, without using a center like apps.
Yeah, essentially, it's like things. If blockchain does proliferate, it will be more like peer to peer. So we wouldn't have to like go through a central, database or like networking system that's controlled by Facebook. Instead, we would just like go directly to our neighbor if we want to talk to our neighbor, and that would be really cool because then we could just like access people locally instead of having to go through the internet. And then there's a lot of interesting things that aren't blockchain but are also kind of similar, where there's things like fire chat where people can talk to people around by using like different technologies. So yeah, essentially it would just be like taking the middleman out.
But wouldn't we need another place to like actually talk? Like if it's like just like neighborhood, you can just like step into the next house. But if it's online, it seems like we need like another platform for this, and then that's gonna be another center. So
yeah, so basically it's like basically we're the user here, right? The way things mostly work is like if we want to talk to this person, we have to go to this like big network, right? And then this like big network goes through like their own private databases, and like they do whatever they want with their data, and then they after that like they spit out your information to like the person, right? But here, without the centralization, basically is like you have your neighbor, like let's say someone in India, someone in China, like someone across the world, right? So if you want to send it to your neighbor, you can just go directly, right? But if you want to go to someone across the world, you can send it to your neighbor if they're closer, and then they send it over here, and they send it over here, right? And so essentially, what the company would be doing is like making these nodes and making it so like you enter your email, make an account, and then you just like make a node here, and then you can make your own like little processing unit. And that might be expensive, but things are getting cheaper, so we'll see how it goes. But essentially here it's more like a network, right? So just go through different people who like share the app or share information or share some kind of like resource so that you can go around and like to send it to each other, right? And then yeah, this way they can't really do anything with their data because it doesn't go through like a central like big thing that just reroutes it automatically to where it wants to go, right?
yeah, that makes sense. So how would it be if it's a browser thing? So like if you want to search something, So for like Google, like they have so much data, and so like people rely on it when you want to search something. But if it's just like personal, like does that mean you ask someone who knows that information?
Do you mean like how does like Brave browser work basically?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ayush, do you know how Brave browser works? I mean, I can kind of guess sort of
Yeah.
how it works.
So I mean, I think the actual underlying protocol behind the browser is very interesting and it's worth a read. But the idea behind Chrome, for example, is that like you connect to Google servers, and then they process your requests. So and then they give you a response. So that's like the request response server format. With Brave, it's not really that different. It's just that instead of a distributed server system that's owned by one person, it's a distributed server system that's owned by multiple people. So there's an additional protocol that connects these multiple servers, that basically makes them talk to each other and understand the state and update the state at the same time. So that's why in general with these decentralized systems, you have a little bit of a speed trade-off for that increase in security.
Yeah. Essentially, it's like if you see the drawing here, it's kind of like you can if it's like if this person doesn't have it, you go and ask someone else like, hey, do you have this? And they're like, no, no. If they say yes, and they're like, okay, and they send it back to you, something like that.
Yeah. I think a good question in the chat is, do you like, is all this conceptual thinking and all this work like too much for many people? Like, the answer is yes. That's why the internet was built this way, with all these centralized institutions that make it super easy, like Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. Like, it's built this way because it's very easy to build this way. It's very easy for coordination. The reason I believe that people will move to decentralized like versions, is because there are increasingly conflicts between giant conglomerates like Facebook, um, and people. I mean, like my entire family, extended family, moved their communication from WhatsApp to Signal recently because of Facebook's updated privacy policy on WhatsApp. So I think people are starting to realize that there are issues with the way that the internet is governed right now. So once people realize, or once people want decentralized governance, the technology will be ready to onboard them. Right now, we're like in a transition phase. So it's not going to be like tomorrow that everyone comes, but it'll happen over time.
Yeah, and also answering Stefan's question. Yeah, so a lot of the main issues is if you don't have a centralized thing, it's kind of slow, right? But there's a lot of like research in the space of making it faster. It's kind of like it's basically just like crazy math. There's things like ZK rollups or like zero knowledge proofs where it's like you don't need to know the content of something to know that it's valid. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going around. So yeah, you can look into that, but there's a lot of like crazy stuff basically. And there's also sharding where you just have like share certain like parts of the data. So you can like parallelize like access. So you can try to access everything at the same time. And there's like a lot of things in CS are kind of like helpful in trying to do like distributed systems where there's machine learning or like crazy cryptography stuff. Anything else? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, should we end it?
Yeah, so yeah, we can end the recording and then feel free to stick around and continue to talk more.